All right, let's talk USC Trojans. It has been one heck of an offseason for USC. Lincoln Riley, GM Chad Bowden, of course, they've done a great job, but there's been a lot of headlines across the college football world. It seems every other hour, more recruiting news is buzzing by. Now we've had a chance to sit back and look at, let all this news settle and see where USC stands. And we look at the data, the insights we put together, folks. The Trojans, really strong spot. We'll get to all that in just 1 second. But first, I'm Nick. That is Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, the USC Trojans have continued to build momentum through the recruiting process. Came out really strong, really good June. July's been hectic. Of course, this is a crazy time in recruiting across the board. Every school, every conference, every single program. We've seen things settle down just a little bit over the past 12 hours. Of course, I probably just jinxed it. Things may pick up again by the time you guys watch this video. But we've taken a step back and said, okay, let's take a purely unbiased analytical approach and then see where every single team stands in terms of the top teams in overall recruiting. So we came up with a metric we call a true recruiting score. It's pretty simple stuff. All it does is just evaluate where you rank in terms of your overall class according to 24/7 Sports and your average recruit ranking, right? So it kind of factors in how big your class is, how deep your class is, and obviously the average quality of recruit. So it takes in a bunch of factors and puts them all together. Let's put it on the screen here so that way everyone can see what I'm talking about. And so these are the top 10 programs in terms of true recruiting score that we put together. Working right to left, low to high, we have Miami, Michigan, then a big step up to Oregon, Ohio State, Georgia, LSU, Texas A&M, and then we have a three-way tie at the top, Alabama, Notre Dame, and USC. So despite all the news, despite all the hoopla, despite all the attention, USC, based on the true recruiting score metric, is still, or at least tied, for being the best recruiting program in the offseason for the 2026 class, right? They were number one currently in terms of overall score courtesy of 24/7 Sports. But when you factor in all these other variables and look at true recruiting score, they're still at least tied for first. There's some factors that help Notre Dame and Alabama bump them into a tie with the Trojans. But when you take a step back, and we have to take a little different approach to evaluate how good a program is doing in terms of recruiting, we have to look at the true recruiting score versus what would be expected of them. And let's pull up our second chart here to highlight what I'm talking about. It's the exact same order, but it's what we call the true recruiting expected score. So basically what this does is it takes the score we showed on the previous stage and this previous slide, and factors in the team's prior season success, right? The way you look at it, it's logical. If a team does really well, they should then, in the prior season, they should be able to leverage that to recruit better, right? If you win a national title, you should be the national championship team. You should recruit extremely well. Alabama, Nick Saban, Georgia, Kirby Smart, they've proven this time and time again. Pete Carroll, USC, way back in the day, they proved it as well. Likewise, if you have a terrible season, it's usually hard to recruit, right? It's, hey, listen, you had a bad year. How do you convince the top recruits to go to your school if you have a bad year? It's a lot harder. So this factors in that expectation based on prior season performance. And this is where USC leaps off the page. You can see right there, USC far left, their true recruiting expected score is 2.0. The next closest team is Texas A&M and Alabama, right about the same there, right about 1.5, a little bit higher. And you can see the rest of the scores, how they shake out across the board. So you can see, you look at Alabama, Texas A&M, these are schools that are doing significantly better than expected. 1.0 is kind of the benchmark there. Notre Dame's had a heck of an offseason. They've done a great job, but they've basically performed as we would expect for a team that made the national championship game. They made the national championship game. Listen, you're a good program, blue blood program. You should be recruiting like this. USC had a, obviously, down year last season. They've had some issues recruiting over the past couple seasons. To be totally honest, we've covered it. They made some changes across the board, coaching staff and program. Things are trending in the right direction. But when you look at this true recruiting expected score, this is what really jumps off the page. And this is what you Trojans fans should really focus on. Because if you can perform the recruiting ranks over your expectation, you can do great things, right? This is what Nick Saban, and I'm going to bring up the Saban example at Alabama, did so well, because even though the expectations were scary high just because of how many games they're winning and winning championships, the recruiting exceeded that expectation, which fueled more wins and more titles. They built the dynasty, right? Kirby Smart, the Georgia Bulldogs, had that for a number of years as well, and they still continue that. You can see over there, about on the right, they're a little bit over that 1.0 mark. They're over expectations. That's a sign of long-term health. You can see actually Ohio State there, and you can see Oregon on the right, Michigan as well. If you're looking at Big Ten schools right now, they're actually below that 1.0 threshold. They're not living up to their expectations. That's kind of a sign that what happened with Ohio State last year, I don't want to say it was a fluke, but it was a magical run. You see Oregon there. They've kind of had to step back in recruiting this year. They're not building on their success. USC is overcoming some challenging expectations. They're doing great in terms of overall effectiveness. I think this has been a great job by Lincoln Riley and Chine Bowden, the entire staff. And you just take a step back, whether it's the data, the analytics, whether it's the media reports, whether it's the actual recruiting news, it's the commit, decommit, and all that kind of stuff going on. It's very clear, it's very obvious, no matter where you look, that this USC program is trending in the right direction. All right, Miles, I'm curious what your thoughts are on all of this. But Trojans fans, you first in the comment section below. We're talking recruiting here a little bit, and that leads me to a very interesting question for you guys. Who is the biggest under the radar recruit in Trojans history who became a star? What's the guy that no one knew about? He showed up on campus and people were like, we offered this guy, and then he became a superstar, right? Every program has some of those guys. I'm asking you guys to pick one in USC history and put them in the comment section below. But Miles, over to you now. What are your thoughts taking a look at this data and just looking at the news and just everything with USC right now?
Yeah, no, it's really impressive that USC has been able to do what they were able to do as far as coming off the season that they have. I think, Bowden coming in is a big deal. I think this team taking a new approach, and we've talked about it ad nauseum. Go back and look at our videos through this whole offseason. There's a lot of great ones on USC and just kind of the wave of their recruiting approach. And I think that's the key here. This has been a much different recruiting year for the Trojans. They really got off to a hot start. They got a lot of recruits in. And this time, last year, we saw them. They got a lot of guys in. A lot of good stuff was going on. But then it seemed like they were hemorrhaging guys left and right. They've really been able to lock it down, keeping a great number of recruits. 31 recruits, more than a lot of people in this class so far, as far the 2026 class. Actually tied for the first overall as far as number of recruits. Only a school that has the same amount of them is North Carolina, and they're 20th in the rankings versus number 1 overall. So again, a credit to USC and what they've been able to do. But something else that's interesting for me, and when you talk about some of these schools on the chart that you bring up and what they're able to do, let's talk about the top 4 recruiting teams right now. 1, 2, 3, 4 is USC, Georgia, Texas A&M, and Notre Dame. I think it's been incredible that USC has been able to hang on to this number 1 spot despite the last 2 months that they had versus what everybody else had. You look at, Notre Dame, they've got 10 guys in the last 2 months, considering this month, July and June, the last 2 months. You look at A&M, they got 13 recruits that they brought in. You had Georgia, they bring in 17 recruits in the last 2 months. USC brought in 4 recruits in the last 2 months because they're taking a different approach. They're trying to lock down the guys that they already have. That's why they've been able to stay at the top. All these other teams making huge pushes. We saw guys leave, guys come back. You can see Georgia, especially, the bring in 17 guys. Look at them. Look how many stories are out there. Recruit leaves, flips from Georgia to said school. There's been a lot in the last couple months. I think there's been a lot of volatility. USC has been stable. They've been, performing above expectation. They've been doing a lot of really good things. And I think now you see the recruiting score, the true recruiting score, as far as expected score goes. They're doing a lot of really good stuff. And I think this Trojans team, there's something special going on. And I think we're going to see a big year in the next couple of years because of the recruiting success they're able to lock down with their new effort, with their new, approach, everything they've done in the recruiting game this year.
And I think the one thing that should really terrify the competition, concern the competition, if you're Oregon, if you're Ohio State, if you're anyone competing with USC, and I'm going to go back to this, is what they've done versus their expectation, compared with what you said, with how they've done a good job holding on to the vast majority of their commitments up to this point. Because one of the things you hear is well, the teams that make the playoff, they start a little behind the 8 ball when it comes to recruiting, right? Because deep into January, late in December, right, they're out preparing, they're game prepping, all that kind of stuff, game planning, practicing. While other programs, they're out there recruiting that entire time. So they fall behind the 8 ball. That's at least what people say. I don't believe it. You're telling me that these massive programs, the Georgias of the world, right, the Ohio States of the world, they don't have the dollars, the time, the effort, the resources to do significant recruiting, even though they're playing a playoff game? Folks, they are, right? That's not really an advantage. But let's put that to the side and just benefit of the doubt, let's say that's the case. We would have seen over the past few weeks, and we have seen with other schools, a significant exodus of players moving around, the volatility that you mentioned. And we're not seeing that with the USC Trojans. They're maintaining where their ranking is. And if you look at their expectation score, the true recruiting expected score, they've continued to accelerate their position ahead of the pack. That to me means that this USC program will, even if things turn around, even if they win more games, which I expect they will, they'll be better this season. I think almost by default they will be. But I think going forward, that will allow this Trojans team to return to being a playoff contender. Because again, going back to that chart, most of the programs that, if outside of a handful, look at the Alabamas, the A&Ms, and Notre Dame right around one, a lot of the playoff teams, especially in the Big Ten, are struggling, right? They're not meeting their expectations, right? It's not easy to do if you win a title, if you win a lot of games, to be totally fair. But the reality is, if you're giving up ground, it means someone else is gaining. And right now, Ohio State's loss, Oregon's loss, Michigan's loss is USC's gain, and they're taking advantage of it. And once a program like USC, one of the true elite of the elite, blue bloods of the blue blood, reemerges and resets your foundation, folks, it's going to be really hard for a team like Oregon. Good program in their own right. I know USC fans probably, don't like to hear that too much, but the reality is Dan Lanning, he's done a good job, a respectable program. It's going to be hard for them to battle back and retake ground once they cede that to USC, because outside of Phil Knight pouring all kinds of Nike money into Eugene, Oregon, they don't have a lot going for them, at least historically, compared to the Trojans. I think USC retaking this territory, reestablishing themselves in this new Big Ten with this recruiting success, followed by what I think will be a lot of wins going forward, will make this the number one force. Better than Ohio State, better than Michigan, Penn State in the Big Ten going forward, and a serious contender, not just to make the postseason, not just to win the Big Ten, but to make deep playoff runs and compete for national titles again in the near future.